So welcome everybody to the third day of our UX at Scale conference. And of course, this is all made possible by the sponsors that we have who have helped us make this event free for the public. Our platinum sponsor is Atlassian, and their team is focused on building powerful experiences for Jira, Confluence, Bitbucket, and all of Atlassian's products. They're actually hiring in Mountain View and in Sydney. So if you're interested in joining a fairly mature design practice, working on really interesting enterprise UX problems, you should check them out. They have almost 200 designers now, and they have a really well-established design process. And I've included the link here if you're interested at all in looking at some of their openings in Mountain View as well as in Sydney. And we also have Salesforce as our gold sponsor, and they have an excellent Medium publication that describes their process and best practices for designing at scale in the enterprise. Some great material here, so I recommend folks to check that out. I've included the link there as well. And of course, if this is your first time joining a webinar from us, we are UXPin, and we are a full stack UX design platform. So that means that you can prototype, create your design system, generate developer documentation, and automate developer handoffs in one place. We handle that whole end-to-end design process. And if you're interested in learning more about our platform, or even just playing around with things, we do have a free trial, and I've included the link there to our homepage. And with that being said, I will pass this over to Davis, and we can go ahead and get started here.
Thanks very much, Jerry. It's great to be a part of this 3-day event. So thank you very much for inviting me to join in. I want to start by taking you back a couple of years ago. It was the fall of 2015. And at the time, Shopify Plus was primarily a sales office. The Shopify platform was running an experiment to see if there might be something to running enterprise-sized businesses on the e-com platform. And around that time, the conclusion was, yes, indeed, there's something there. And so the office in Waterloo was starting to transition to a product organization. At that time, there were a handful of engineers in the building, primarily serving the internal needs of the organization, but a few of them had been tasked with starting to think about product for Shopify Plus and what that might look like. And specifically, they had been given the space of B2B software. Is there an opportunity? Well, there are many opportunities there for us to help merchants expand into that space, and how might Shopify Plus help them do that? So that handful of engineers did what any passionate, talented, and ambitious team would do. They went out and talked to merchants. They participated regularly and religiously in agile sprint methodologies, running weekly sprints, retros, demos, and tracking their progress against their goals on a regular basis to see how far how far they had come and how they could continue to do better. And you can imagine how that team felt when, in the winter of 2015, they presented their first version of that product offering to internal stakeholders. You can imagine how they would feel when it fell very flat. They had missed the mark on how that offering might be able to have product market fit. So fast forward a couple of months later, Shopify Plus made a few hires in UX. And now we had a group of engineers and UX folks who went back to the drawing board. And they did what any passionate, curious, and ambitious team would do. They went heads down into that problem space. They talked to merchants, they talked to other stakeholders, they mapped out experiences, they prototyped, they tracked their progress weekly using Agile Sprint rituals, demos, retros, and so on, to see how far they were coming and to see how they can improve week over week. And you could imagine how that team felt in the spring of 2016 when they released their alpha to a limited set of merchants, and it fell flat. It had little to no adoption in that group, in that small group of merchants, and the team was forced to take a step back and to rethink. Fast forward a couple more months, and Shopify Plus had made its next strategic hire, and that was the director of product management here who joined the organization. So now we had product management, UX, and engineering as a holistic team, and they went back to the drawing board to see how they could take our merchants into the B2B space. And they did what any passionate, curious, and ambitious team would do. They went heads down into the problem. They talked to merchants. They prototyped. They aligned across stakeholders within the company. They did some market research. They explored different technical solutions. They tracked their progress week over week to see how they were marching towards their goals and vision. And you can imagine how that team felt in the fall of 2016 when they released their beta offering with resounding success. That beta offering was adopted by a host of merchants, and I'm proud to say that that continues to be a very compelling product offering within the Shopify Plus line. So I share this story to say a little bit about how passion, talent, and ambition sometimes are not enough. Sometimes it's a little bit more than that, and it's about having the right skills, the right perspectives as a part of a holistic product organization. And that's really where I want to spend our time today, is talking about how those perspectives, the skills, and the roles from product management, user experience, and engineering can really work together to build a holistic solution that better serves the needs of your user base, our merchants. So this notion of trifectas, it's not new. For anyone who's been in the product world, I'm sure you have heard about Don Norman's three-legged stool analogy, where there's a balance between these three roles and perspectives, and how when you have all of them together in the same room, in the same project, there is great things that come out of that when balancing those perspectives. So trifectas are not new, but the spoiler alert is that everything else is. Modern product development is really hard. The number of individual roles and titles that go into building a successful digital product are mind-boggling. And to stay ahead in this day and age, leaders are really going to need to challenge the status quo. We can't go back and rely on how we used to work. How those roles work together in the past may not necessarily be the same skills and techniques that take us forward. So what's different? SaaS delivery has really sped up the time to release. So because offerings can be released so quickly, if one of those cycles is missed, if a product misses its market fit, you can bet dollars to donuts there is a competitor out there who is willing to swoop in and take up that market opportunity. We don't have the luxury of time anymore. top talent is in high demand, especially here in the Waterloo region with such a ripe ecosystem of tech startups. And I'm sure this exists in other areas of the world as well. These top organizations are looking for folks to join in a very profound way. And we're in danger of losing that top talent if we are not providing highly functioning organizations for them to excel. And finally, as organization scales, it's hard to keep informed of everything that's going on these days. So as your product becomes more successful, there are more people in the organization. We can't just rely on having those three perspectives in a large organization. There's going to need to be a little bit more structure and a little bit of organization. So these are only a couple of the things that have changed the landscape in product development, which force us as leaders within product organizations to think a little bit differently about how we're approaching problem solving. Okay, so before we get a little bit further in, let's talk exactly about what I mean by a trifecta. So David O. Russell brings the notion of trifecta forward in the context of cinematography. And really, we can talk about trifectas, the power of three across a broad spectrum of topics. Nature seems to have real balance and harmony when there is a healthy tension between perspectives of three types. It's not a coincidence that good things come in threes, Three Musketeers, the Holy Trinity, and so on. There are a number of examples that bring the power of three to focus. And specifically when we talk about product development and in product organizations, the trifecta refers to different perspectives on the same problem. It talks about the viability of a product offering. Is this something that is going to be successful in the marketplace? Is there a need for this offering? It also brings the feasibility perspective in. Is it possible for us as an organization to solve this problem? Do we have the right technology in place? Is there the right knowledge in-house? Can we provide a solution technically that will make this viable? And finally, the desirability aspect of a successful product offering. Is this something that users are going to want? Is this something that is going to be compelling enough to empower them to put down your competitor offering and to pick yours up instead? So when we take a look at this trifecta from another angle, it's really about product management, engineering, and user experience. So what is it about these perspectives that really make them such an incredibly strong triad? How do these three approaches bring together a holistic offering? Well, if I go back to the story that I told at the beginning of this webinar about how the Shopify Plus product organization tried 3 times with 1, 2, and 3 of these roles represented, we can unpack it a little bit more. So when it was solely engineering, they were focused on technically how could they make this work with Shopify. So at that time, Shopify was a platform. Shopify Plus was this new product offering, and they spent a lot of time and energy trying to figure out how we could bolt on this additional offering for our merchants, and how would we even make that work. And what we found was that wasn't enough. There was going to have to be more to that story. And when UX came on board, they had a lot of questions around whether or not we were even solving the right problems. The B2B space is a very big one, but what slice of that were we really going to focus on? And going back to the engineering piece of offering that technical solution, what were the user experience implications of that, of having a bolt-on offering on top of the Shopify platform itself? And those perspectives in themselves weren't quite enough. And finally, when PM joined, we had someone who was now astutely aware of the need to deal with and gain alignment with internal stakeholders. Someone once said that good PMs advocate for the customer with their engineering team, but a great PM is an advocate for each group of stakeholders with the others within the overarching framework of the project. And so really, it's not just about the customer's perspective, and it's not just about our partner's perspective or us as a project team's perspective, but there was a lot of intel and other stakeholders within the organization that we really needed to understand and hone in on before we could be confident in the solution and the direction that we were driving. I should also add that our product manager was really skilled at prioritizing. So in this new product space that Shopify Plus was exploring, all the could-dos were a really seductive and distracting notion for the project team. And our PM was really focused on narrowing in our vision and making sure that we were all aligned and charging towards the right goal. Okay, so then let's take this step up, this topic of trifectas up a step, and let's talk about what they look like in organizations of scale and as the organization grows. So to start with, when there are small product organization, teams are very self-contained and self-directed. They're going to run their own agile and planning rituals. They are going to be responsible for defining their own milestones, key metrics, and they often have individuals wearing multiple hats to satisfy the needs of the team. So PM, UX, and engineering are contained within that single team, and they may or may not be completed by different individuals. But the key thing here is that you have one small product team. They're all working on the same problem, and the responsibilities of resourcing, vision, and tracking towards their goals, that's all self-contained. Communication and context sharing is relatively easy in this kind of setting because it's such a small group. They're often contained within the same office, or at least on the same floor. The three roles within the organization are then easy to keep aligned because they're sitting beside each other and working closely with each other day in and day out. So now as demand for your product increases, hiring sprees occur, and the organization is now going to take on a very different look. Now no longer is everybody working on the same problem. Rather, multiple projects are spun up to solve different problems for the user sets, and those are assigned to individual teams now. There might not even be commonalities across the teams when it comes to that problem set. So you might have some folks working on mobile, where you have other folks working on a problem set that would never even be compelling on mobile. And so you have very different skills, you have very different focus areas on those different projects. And now, because you have folks working on very different projects, communication, the efficiency and the effectiveness of collaborating across these projects is either too time-consuming or not really valuable because the context between each project isn't as necessary when it comes to domain expertise. And so because you don't have context or shared empathy across these project teams, it makes making effective business decisions and resourcing decisions very difficult. Communication starts to be hard and time-consuming, and if it's not addressed, it can be detrimental to the success of the organization. So in this scenario, the R&D organization benefits from the guidance and the oversight of a single trifecta body at the product level. Here, each of the roles of PM, UX, and engineering is represented in a small team that oversees the series of projects, helping to steer the individual teams in their decision-making and their vision. So I just want to touch on when an org might be ready to bump out into this shape as opposed to being contained within a single one. So just a couple of heuristics or things to look out for in your own organization. One that I've touched on already is the efficiency of the communication. Is everybody able to get the same message and in a timely manner that can have value? And moreover, is the same message necessary across all projects, or does every team need its own set of guidance and decision-making heuristics? Is there some stability to the problems that you're solving with new ones being added? So are new projects coming up and they seem to be ones that are sticking? Or are you still in a place where new projects are coming up and then you're de-investing? There's too much experiment and churn still happening where it doesn't make sense to break out a team on its own because you don't know if they're still going to even be there in a month's time. And finally, is there enough project execution work that members of the team are wholly consumed by that and they don't have time anymore to be making other decisions like hiring, roadmap decisions, resourcing, and so on? So if any of these are happening, they might be signs that your organization is now at a size where it makes sense to bump it out into distinct product groups and having the oversight of a single product trifecta. Okay, so congratulations. If your organization is now starting to look like this, it probably means that your product is having success in the marketplace. Hiring sprees are happening, and the organization is needing to continue to grow to support the strategic product directions. So here you start to have multiple projects clustering around a single theme or domain areas, and those aren't tending to change. So for example, if you're, let's say, solving problems in the e-commerce space, you might find that shipping is starting to be a domain area with multiple projects that are spinning out of that, and those seem to hold and are probably not going anywhere. So now you have an organization with a series of domains, and each of those domains have its own set of projects and people. And so with that comes now the need for a trifecta within each of those domains to help steer business decisions and to grow domain expertise within that set of projects. So oversight across all the domains will then be bumped up at that product trifecta level. So the representation from probably your most senior, from the most senior leadership across UX, engineering, and PM will sit within that product trifecta. And at any given time, you want to make sure that representation from each of these roles, depending on the activity that's happening, will depend on which level of trifecta needs to be pulled in. But you want to make sure that there's representation across the entire business. So just to give you a little snapshot of what our organization looks like today. So over the last 2 years, our organization has taken shape through organic growth, hiring, and acquisitions. And actually, over the last year, our engineering organization has remained relatively flat. And we've, as a product organization, again, going kind of foreshadowing some of the responsibilities of that product trifecta. But our product trifecta has consciously made the decision to hold hiring from the engineering layers while we allow our product management and our UX layers to staff up so that we can provide good representation across each of those product group levels. And I have to say that when we take a look at Shopify across the board, these ratios tend to hold across all of our each of our offices. And this is just to give you a little bit of thought around what our ratios and numbers look like and how at this size, we find that the product domain and project level trifecta model is really taking shape and being meaningful and valuable. So at a high level, the trifecta model really provides a lot of benefit to the health of the organization. It provides project teams the freedom and the autonomy to move quickly. So a lot of those business decisions, context sharing, hiring decisions, all of those are moved upstream to either the domain or the trifecta level, so that project team can really be focused on executing towards their vision or against those project milestones. The trifecta model itself also provides a defined pool for resource sharing at scale. So if you think back to the picture that I just showed, within a domain and you have a series of projects, resource allocation happens within that domain. You now have a defined set of resources that you can assign across projects. Maybe you pull them all into one based on what your priorities are for the roadmap at that given time. Maybe you might have some experiments spinning up, and so you need the domain expertise to be able to peel a few people off from those individual projects to form the experimental project. But you know that now you have a defined pool of skills and expertise that you can work with to make that domain work efficiently and effectively. There's also the stability for building rich domain expertise and role specificity. So by that I mean, by having, as I said before, a shipping trifecta, for example, and you have a series of projects happening within that, you are now empowering each member of that shipping team to be building up expertise. Regardless of which project they're on, they're going to really get to know what problems merchants or your users are having within that domain. So when they do move to another project within the shipping trifecta, they're still going to be taking that expertise with them. You're really giving employees an opportunity to build up that empathy for that problem space, and role specificity too. So they can focus on being the world's best developer, the world's best designer, the world's best product manager, as opposed to forcing them to wearing multiple hats or moving up and down in terms of the strategic or tactical decisions that need to be made. And finally, the trifecta model really provides the foundation and heuristics for spinning up new domains and projects. Now you've got some organizational stability around how the product organization is functioning, so that when you do start to see problems cluster around a specific theme, you've already got a model on which you can extend and spin up a new trifecta, a new domain trifecta with one or two projects underneath that. You don't have to go reorging the organization with each new project that spins up. The trifecta itself, so that pillar, that leadership pillar of a PM, a UX practitioner, and a engineering lead together really provide structure and vision for their organization, so that these organizations can just focus on executing efficiently and effectively. If we're talking about what trifectas are, we should probably spend a minute thinking about what trifectas are not. So first, I should say that while this presentation is really rooted around product organizations, please don't assume that trifectas are only effective in product organizations. The trifecta really means that the multiple perspectives are coming together around a shared problem space to define vision and to enable teams to work towards that vision. So we might find that being very applicable when it comes to marketing initiatives. And in marketing, perhaps the person who's holding, for example, that viability perspective, that PM perspective, might very well be a marketing lead. You might have someone from business operations or an internal group who is supporting marketing campaigns and marketing tools, holding that feasibility perspective around how are we actually going to help make this marketing initiative happen. And then you might very well still have someone in a design role helping to complete that trifecta when it comes to marketing. The trifecta itself is not just about having balanced skill representation. It's not just about making sure that all of those three perspectives are taken into account. It's more about making sure that someone is wholly owning those perspectives, and those three perspectives together have a joint set of responsibilities and expectations on how to execute as a trifecta. And we'll get into that a little bit more. Sometimes with those expectations and the responsibilities that they have, the trifecta can feel like a gatekeeper, preventing or moving projects forward. That's not really their role. Their role is more to empower teams to make good decisions on their own so that they can move through to the next phase in product development or to ship or to maintenance and tweak modes. But sometimes it might feel like they're a gatekeeper because of the kinds of questions they're asking and just by the very nature of it looking like a hierarchical structure. And finally, trifectas are by no means easy. This is something that we are constantly thinking about, constantly struggling with, reiterating, learning fast, failing fast, learning much, moving forward on. And so I would encourage anybody who's listening to this, if you feel like you are struggling with trifectas, it probably means you're doing something right and you're thinking about the right things. If someone finds this to be a breeze, I would challenge you to think about how you're positioning the trifecta, and if you're fully thinking about that in a way that it can be wholly effective. Okay, so let's dive into some of the specifics around these trifectas. One thing, the first principle is that trifectas very much have clear responsibilities and should demand accountability. As I said just a moment ago, it's more than just having those skills represented. It is a part of an individual person's job role is to make sure that these responsibilities are being executed. So if we go through each of the levels, at the trifecta level, at the product trifecta level, this group of individuals is responsible for the outcome of the entire product offering. It's this person, it's this group that the GM or the CEO is going to look to when we're talking about how well that product is doing in the marketplace. So this trifecta is dreaming in years, thinking about the roadmap in terms of future vision, and they're acting in quarters. So they're going to be reprioritizing and relooking at that roadmap on a quarterly basis and disseminating that information, that set of priority projects to that domain trifecta quarterly. Some of the expectations that other teams will have of them is that they are responsible for resourcing. So are we staffing up the product organization over the upcoming year and with engineers, more PMs? What are those ratios? Do we have the right skills? Do we have leads? Do we need more individual contributors? Asking questions like that and looking holistically at the organization. And related to talking about future vision and roadmap conversations, they'll also be responsible for identifying new investment areas. Where should the product organization be orienting itself on a quarterly and annual basis? Where is that focus? Some of the day-to-day responsibilities or activities that you'll find this trifecta doing is re-evaluating and iterating on the organization design. Are we ready to spin up a new domain trifecta? Are we large enough for that? Do we need to shuffle folks around to improve the health of the organization? They're also going to be setting for, on a quarterly or annual basis, depending on how your organization works, the strategic priorities. What do we as a product organization need to be focused on in the upcoming quarter or the upcoming year to make sure that our product outcomes are killing it in the marketplace? And that might be across a host of different topics or initiatives, but ultimately it will be up to that product trifecta to set. Next is that domain trifecta, who is then responsible for the outcome of a set of projects that's typically grouped around a product theme or set of problems that are being experienced by users in the marketplace. So this group now is dreaming in quarters. They're thinking about how they're going to get their projects to execute against that roadmap that the product trifecta set out for them on a quarterly basis, and they're working on a monthly basis with their project teams to define milestones within that quarter. So these folks are really leading a team of teams, right? They're leading individual projects within an overall problem space. They're responsible for making sure there's alignment within the organization, within their small organization, and that there is good health of that organization. So they're going to be responsible for making sure that each of those projects is having good organizational hygiene, doing their sprint planning, and those rituals are happening, making sure that the culture within that organization is healthy, and if it's not, doing something about that. And once your product gets out into the marketplace, you know, many people say that's the easy part. The hard part is actually maintaining it. How do you balance maintenance requests and bugs fixes with new investment opportunity and new feature sets? And that really comes down to that domain trifecta to carry out that balance and to make decisions for their domain area. So some of the activities might be that these folks are kicking off new projects within that domain, setting the vision for that project. Along with that, doing release planning on a monthly basis, defining what kind of project is this? Is this an experiment, or is this a project or platform level? And finally, then the project team. So they're responsible for an individual project's outcome. They're dreaming in months and really acting in a weekly basis, focusing on their sprint rituals. They're going to be executing against that project brief that the domain trifecta set out, and also communicating upward how things are going with their product organization. And some of the activities I had outlined a little while ago with regards to sprint planning, demos, retros, milestone reviews, and so on. This is just a quick overview of examples of where the different trifecta layers will be involved in the projects. Sometimes there'll be actors and sometimes there'll be stakeholders depending on what the task is. So for example, in roadmap definition, that's really the product trifecta is the actor in that. They own that activity, and the domain trifectas and the project teams are stakeholders and executing against the outcome. So I show this picture not to be prescriptive, and this is how it has to be, but more about how you're going to have different level of involvement depending on where you are. So the next thing is that trifectas can be leveraged as organizational structures. So they're not just about the skill sets and the perspectives, but we can also leverage them for a lot more value. So you can use the trifecta to help model out the organization of projects, right? So we'd said that you'll have product, domain, and project teams in execution. And here's just a sample, an example of at Shopify Plus, there's a couple of theme areas. There are multiples, but I just chose these as examples. Automation, and the project teams within that will be Shopify Flow and Shopify Scripts. So how can we help merchants automate their business processes within e-com? And then we might have another domain that's about plus services. So how might we support our merchants with not fully product offerings, but services as well. So migration, billing, onboarding, and so on. So when you take a look at it like this, now you're taking a look at the organization from a project, a people point of view, and you might be able to use it as highlighting reporting structures as well. So maybe at the topmost level, you have a director level of UX, who's then has a leadership team underneath within those domains and project teams within that reporting up to those senior leads and so on. So the trifecta does not just have to be about project management, but it might also be about people management and providing a nice double as a reporting structure. And finally, trifectas can help gain insight into the organization health. Because trifectas are involved at multiple areas, they're good at sniff testing out areas that might need some help. So for example, when you lay out your organization in this way, you can clearly identify where you have missing roles. Projects might not be moving forward quite as quickly, and when you take a look at skills and perspectives, you might find that, oh, maybe the UX organization isn't as represented as we needed. I mentioned this a little while ago at Shopify Plus. We have spent the last year intentionally holding off on engineering hiring while we wait for PM and UX resources to catch up. And so this was an intentional action of the product trifecta. You might also use it to help improve communication efficiencies, right? So instead of having to tell everybody all the things all the time, you're using the trifectas themselves to disseminate the right context at the right time. We all know that as organizations scale, everybody is busy. Time is precious, and how we choose to spend that is really important. So we want to make sure that we are being effective with our time. And one of the ways in which the trifectas can really be effective is by asking great questions through those project teams. So the first one is, have we assembled the right team? Do we have the right skills there? Do we agree on the goals and metrics? Is everyone focused on what will be success and what's not success? The trifecta is also asking if we are being opinionated and saying no to the right things. Do we have a good handle on what we need to prioritize and what things are just distractions at this time? Trifectas, in their different levels of engagement with the organization, will also be asking questions of quality. So have we hit the right level of quality for the things that we are learning, for our goals and for our set of metrics? Will this help us solve customer problems, and is it going to be a delightful experience? And finally, can we tell if we are improving week over week, and can we tell if our team is hitting its goals? So these are just a couple of the kinds of questions that are really powerful that the trifectas help to use to probe on those project teams to get them to work a little bit more effectively or efficiently. This is just a couple of examples of the kinds of meetings that these questions might be leveraged through. So the trifectas will be engaging with the organization through project rituals. At any point, a domain trifecta may pop into a project team's planning, demos, retros. The project teams will be having milestone reviews with their trifectas on an ongoing basis. So saying, hey, I think we're ready to ship, and presenting those reasons and the rationale to that trifecta, and a conversation will happen there as to whether or not, yes, we're ready to move on, or no, we have some more work to do. At Plus, we have project lead sync every week. So a member of each of those project teams are hooking up and spending time with each other on a weekly basis to share how their projects are doing. And the trifectors are sitting in on that to kind of to help where those projects might be stuck. And you might have a number of different examples within your organization of how those trifectas are engaging with the product teams. I appreciate we're getting close on time here, so I'm just going to quickly move through a couple of lessons that we have learned through our time in thinking about and being intentional about trifectas at Shopify Plus. So the first thing, organizational changes should come after a trifecta has been stabilized to minimize thrash. So this goes back a little bit to the value of the trifecta in establishing some norms and heuristics around when is the right time to actually spin up a project and assign dedicated resources there. especially in this time, everybody's looking to fail fast, learn, ship often, and learn lots. And so experiments are not anything new. But what we need to be intentional about is how dedicated those resources are to experiments and what the impact is having on those project teams. Are we yoinking individuals across the organization willy-nilly on experiments, or have we kind of stabilized around a set of problems, and it makes sense to be intentional about making organizational change, spinning up new trifectas, making reporting structure changes, and so on. Those more impactful changes should really come after the trifecta model has been changed, after a new domain has been spun up. And that's just to give folks a better feel for, oh, this is a real thing here. I can now identify as a part of this team. I feel good here, and I'm okay to experiment within this space. It gives employees a sense of anchoring. The next lesson is that it takes a lot of time to build the trust necessary for effective relationships to be established. So within the trifectas, there are going to be challenges of perspectives. And I would challenge any organization that does not have tough conversations at those levels to be wondering whether or not you're doing it right. I mean, just by the nature of having different perspectives, you would hope that there is challenging conversations, but with care and with trust. And so don't underestimate how long it takes for those relationships to be built, where you can now have those kinds of constructive, critical conversations, knowing that everybody is in it for the same reasons, and that is to improve the project at hand. And finally, as the organization grows, you really need to identify what kind of change you're trying to, that you have on hand, and what is the right level of response. So spinning up new domain trifectas may not be the right answer all the time. You want to make sure that you're taking into account the project type. Is this an experiment? Is this a project? Is this a platform level thing? There needs to be an expectation that UX, product, and engineering is going to be involved, but it might not be at the level of requiring it being a brand new trifecta. So take a look at what the kind of problem is that you're solving, and see what's the right response level to have there. So scaling product groups is really hard work. As I mentioned before, there's a lot happening in product organizations. There's a lot of context. Things are happening so fast that it's really difficult to get a handle on it all and to be thinking about all the things all the time. You know, more projects, more people, more problems. But I can assure you, if you get the right people in the room, if you structure the organization around the power of the trifecta, if you have all those three roles working in harmony with each other, I can assure you that it might be hard work, but it will also be a good time. Thanks very much for spending some time with me today. I really enjoyed it, and maybe, Jerry, we can open it up to questions if there's some time.
Yeah, absolutely. Great job, Davis. We definitely have some questions here that we can dive into. And before we get in there, just a few quick announcements again from our sponsors here. So, of course, we have Atlassian, who is a gold sponsor, or sorry, a platinum sponsor, and they are actually hiring in their Mountain View and in their Sydney office on their design team. And their design team is focused on building powerful experiences for Jira, Confluence, Bitbucket, and all of Atlassian's products. So if you're interested in checking that out, here's the link. They have a really mature design practice. So if you're interested in working in the enterprise on a well-established team, definitely consider Atlassian. And of course, Salesforce is our gold sponsor. And they have a really practical Medium publication that their UX team maintains. And it's a fantastic resource for anybody who designs enterprise products. And with that being said, let's dive into some of the Q&A here. And because we can't get to all of the questions, we do have a Slack team here, which I've invited all the speakers to, and we have over 6,000 folks here. It's designers, developers, product managers. If you have more than 3 years of experience working on a product team, we do encourage you to apply Product Tribes. And now we can dive into some of the questions. All right, let's take a look here. So the first question that we'll look at is around reporting structure. So what does the reporting structure look like for the 3 groups that you mentioned? So design, engineering, product. And then as a follow-up, does UX report up to a UX leader, or does it ultimately roll up to a product leader?
Great question. Thank you very much for that one. So I'll take the first question is about reporting structures. So out here, at least at Shopify Plus, our Trifecta model doubles as also a reporting structure. So at our product Trifecta, we have director of product and engineering and our UX lead who are working as a product Trifecta. And the rest of those organizations within the domain Trifecta and then within the project teams roll up accordingly. So we have our senior most folks in the product Trifecta, the senior leadership team. So the leadership team within each of those organizations is represented within the domain Trifectas. And then the project teams are made up of leads as well as individual contributors. And so following that, yes, each of our 3 teams that make up our R&D organization, that make up our product organization, product management, UX, and engineering, do roll up to an individual in each of those 3. And those 3 roll up into the GM of the organization. So it's not like everybody funnels into a like a product director level. There is a responsibility for leadership within each of those pillars.
Got it. And let's see, as a related question, are all of your teams co-located? And do you see this Trifecta working when 3 different roles may be in different locations or even different time zones?
So I would say in this day and age, it's nearly impossible to always have all those roles co-located. In fact, so here at Shopify Plus, we're pretty fortunate that the majority of our teams work in one office, but I would not say that means that we're always co-located. So Shopify is a big company with offices in a number of locations. At any given time, members of any level of the organization could be at a different office. We offer very flexible working environments here, so people might be at home. I would say that even though we're co-located within a building, sometimes just the friction of going to another floor is enough to make it feel like you may as well be in a different time zone or a different building. So I would say that by pure definition, most of us are co-located in the same building, but we are often working across Hangouts, through Slack, in a variety of mediums to bring us closer, which is why we've been really intentional about, on a quarterly basis, having all hands, about having meetings that pull everyone together so we can be in the same space, and why the week-over-week communications and established meetings and having a cadence on a more regular basis is really important, so that if you do miss a week or a meeting because you're at another office, you're away, who knows why, you don't have to go a long time before you catch up and get aligned with your peers again, whichever level that's at.
Right. And let's see. The next question is, so at Shopify, who is responsible for the product and the experience strategy? Is that a shared responsibility, or does it lean more, one side to product management versus design?
So I'd say here at Plus, it is the overall vision and direction that the organization is taking is a shared responsibility around that product trifecta. So product can't pull in one direction if engineering and UX aren't bought in, for example. There needs to be shared vision and shared alignment around there. And UX may be contributing just as much product vision in terms of where it needs to go to better meet the needs of merchants in the market. So I would say that's a shared responsibility. The roadmap itself as an artifact, as an outcome of that vision, at least here in Plus, is owned by the product manager. So someone at the end of the day has to be responsible for filling in what the things are on a quarterly basis, what the project level is. So that artifact here is owned by the product manager, but I would not say that that sets, well, I would say that it is based on a lot of input and shared vision from all three perspectives. And it just happens to be an artifact that is owned, a single outcome that is owned by the product manager.
Right. And so on a related note, how do we prevent the trifecta itself from becoming a silo?
It's a great question. Because that's absolutely as soon as we start to draw these boxes that have boundaries around them, it can very much start to feel like that. And it's actually a really relevant question because within, as we're drawing out these questions and having conversations with our own team, this keeps coming up. And I think that's probably the most important thing, is to be aware of it as a risk, as a potential outcome that could very much happen. And once you're aware of a risk, you can be intentional about mitigating it. So I think it's great that we are talking about that thing, because the more we talk about it and the more we identify it, the more we can help prevent it from happening, as opposed to sweeping it under the rug. I would go back to finding opportunities within the organization where it makes sense to have shared context. So for example, here on a weekly basis, that domain trifecta, all domain trifectas, so three folks from each of those areas, shipping plus services and so on, they get together weekly to talk about how things are going within their organizations. This project is really moving forward. It's about to ship. This one's struggling. Have you seen this kind of thing before? What might we do differently? How might we be doing it better? And so on. So that's one example of how we prevent these silos from taking place, is to find ways that are strategic to bring groups together. And that does not mean the whole organization has to always be talking to each other. Leverage the trifecta model to communicate and to collaborate where it makes sense and where it's most efficient.
Right. And as a follow-up question, so this person is in a situation where engineering and product management are working together pretty well. And he is curious, do you have any recommendations on how design can start becoming a part of that working relationship, especially in a smaller organization where there's not a lot of these potential trifectas, but design is still trying to embed itself into that engineering and product management workflow and decision-making process?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of opportunities there, and it's not uncommon. It's not uncommon, so don't feel alone in that. Who asked the I think a really good way to come into an organization and provide value is to be asking good questions and to be filling in gaps within established workflow. So rather than coming in and pushing a UX agenda or a designer agenda, oh, we need to have sketches, we need to be doing mapping, we need to be doing this, and having the risk of your PM or your engineering colleague looking at you and wondering, like, what's going on? We don't need those things. Have it be more about asking questions around how things are going, what the process currently looks like, where those folks are in the process today, and then identifying how you might help, how you might bring some of those decisions that PM and engineering have made, bring them to light. How can you surface them? How can you make them visual? How can you put them up on a wall so that everybody is able to see what decisions have been made and what PM and engineering have been steering the team around? I think a lot of UX provides a lot of value. One of its great strengths is its ability to help a team visualize. That doesn't just mean UIs and sketches and prototypes. It also might mean visualizing problem sets, visualizing user traits, visualizing journey maps. There are a number of tools there that we can use to insert ourselves within an existing process as opposed to having to or trying to get folks to change to our process and methodology.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely a great point about the visualization aspect of design. And let's see, since we are now a little bit over time, we will take just another question here. Let's see. So this question is around building trust. Do you have any suggestions for building trust between the teams within the Trifecta?
Do I have suggestions? I can share some personal experiences. So one thing is time. It will take time, and it will take being intentional within that time. So if you have to relay a message, can you do it over Slack? Probably. It's probably pretty quick. Will it be worth that extra 30 seconds to walk over to that person's desk to make a connection and to say, hey, how's it going? Have a quick conversation about that and then dive into what that message was. Don't estimate the value of those personal connections that you can make. Talking about and providing opportunities to meet outside of work, also very helpful. So we do offsites here. So sometimes those trifectas will spend time, even if it's talking about business related things, but we'll get ourselves outside of the office. We'll go to a shared workspace within the city somewhere. It doesn't have to be extravagant, but just the very nature of getting outside of this building helps us realize that people are just people, regardless of, like, we're more than just the roles that we have when we come to work every day. I always remember whenever I saw my elementary school teachers at the grocery store, it always caught me off guard because I was like, hey, wait, you're totally out of context. And then, hey, wait, you're a real person who does grocery shopping too. And so sometimes just meeting our colleagues in another place helps us to gain another perspective and valuing them as a person as well as their role within the company. And then finally, there are also some tools that you can use to gain some shared empathy. So we've had great success in not just doing retrospectives as a Trifecta, but doing timeline retrospectives. So creating a space where we have the opportunity to talk about different events that have happened over the course of a quarter or a half year or a year, and talk about how did things go? How did that make you feel? How did those decisions impact each person individually and us as a Trifecta? And through some of these shared experiences and shared reflection opportunities, it's another chance for us to build up that trust and build shared empathy within the smaller teams.
Yeah, that's a great point. And on that note, we will actually close off the session here. Davis, thanks for joining us. That was a great presentation. A lot of people here really appreciated it. And for all the people here who joined us. Yeah, thanks for coming with such great questions. As a final note, of course, we get so many questions that we can't answer all of them in the session here. So to continue the conversation, we do have a Slack group that I am including the link to, and we have over 6,100 folks there, designers, product managers, and developers. It's called Product Tribes, and if you have more than 3 years of experience on a product team, we do encourage you to apply, and we've invited all the speakers into that community as well. So on that note, yeah, thanks, Davis. This was a great job.
Thanks very much, Jerry. It's been a really great time, and I'm really honored to be a part of this community. Thanks so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And our next session here is going to be around design systems. And so Forum 1 is going to be sharing a case study of their design systems work for the, I believe it's the Red Cross here that they work with. And they're going to be talking about how they built that design system as part of a redesign project. So here is the Zoom link for the next session, which we will be starting in about 25 minutes here at 10:30 a.m. Pacific. I hope to see everybody there as well. And yeah, otherwise, have a great rest of the morning, and see you all very soon. Take care.
Thank you.